and a lot of what they traded was the Wapato. And in fact, so many tribes came in that they actually divided up the plots. They would put markers out so that certain families could harvest from certain areas, so there wouldn't be wars over, fighting over certain plots and stuff. And so as widespread as all the Wapato was, there were so many people coming in, they still had to do that. Now is not the time to harvest Wapato. I'm showing you it now because that's when you can see. Now is when you can see the above ground growth. So give it another month and it'll be really much more lush than this. The leaves will be a lot bigger, and then in 2 months it'll start dying away. So you won't be able to see anything. All you see is a lake. So people who harvested it in the past had to know where the plants were to go back to harvest it in November, when they could get the tubers that were at their prime. Now, the tubers are really at their prime anywhere from October through February. But they used to get them in November because every tribe had a quota of other priorities. And that was the best time that, they knew they could do it over a 4-month period. So November was the time where they weren't doing other things as much, and they could devote a huge amount of human resources to actually come out and harvest the stuff. But again, you had to know where the plants were, because when it's ripe, you can't see the above ground growth anymore.
Is this a tidal plain? Will this fill up with the tide?
Well, yeah, in the middle of winter, when we get all the rains, this will be a lake. You won't see any of the soil. But it used to be. When I did these workshops, when I first started doing this like 20 years ago, not here either. So things have changed. It's becoming more successional, which means that maybe in 30 years, this will be grassland. Maybe 50 years, I don't know. It's hard to say.
Or a parking lot.
Or a parking lot. Yeah. So
how sad.
Yeah. So this may not last. Now, one of the benefits of harvesting it is that you actually clear away the soil and the muck and kill the competition that sometimes helps to fill in the lake. So for a lot of places where it's not filling in, harvesting actually increases the yield. And that's true of a lot of wild foods. So a lot of the parks and stuff that have a totally hands-off aspect about harvesting things, in some respects they're sort of shooting themselves in the foot, because some things need to be like camas too. If you're not harvesting camas, then it gets more and more spread out, more and more invasive species get in, and you start losing it.
Is the tuber more calorie dense?
Yeah, it's like potato. In fact, it tastes like an Idaho potato with a tiny tinge of bitterness that's so mild that if you just put salt on it, you can't taste it anymore.
And would you harvest this with a rake, or what's the best way to get it?
No, so what the literature says is that the Native American women would go out with a canoe in tow up to their chest. This is in November where it's very cold. Up to their chest with the canoe in hand. And what they would do is they'd feel with their toes, grab the tubers and pull them up above the muck, and then they float to the surface because they're buoyant. Grab them and throw them in the canoe. But I did my own research on this, which is what I do with every plant that I study intensely, is I test everything I read about, because oftentimes the stories are wrong. And in this one, I believe the stories were wrong. So in November, it is so cold you can't feel your feet. Now, Native Americans might have been able to feel more back in the old days because they're used to being outside all the time. Okay, I accept that. But they also had calluses that were 10 times thicker than my calluses. In fact, I don't even have any calluses. So that would also affect it. So the times that I tried it, I kept searching around with my feet. I could never find them that way. It was a big job trying to, search with your foot to find each little tuber. So I thought, okay, well, the tubers are connected by these thin rhizomes that have to be broken in order to release them to float to the surface. So why not just break the rhizomes? So I thought, well, I'll try doing the grape stomping thing, where you just, you're in one place and you just sort of stomp the muck for a while, breaking up the muck. So I'm out there doing this, and I didn't have a canoe. I just had a backpack with a modified back, so I could just throw them up. They'd hit the back and fall into the backpack. So I'm stomping. A few minutes, nothing's happening. Then all of a sudden, bloop, one pops up. So I grab it, throw it in the backpack, and then I'm stomping a little more. Another one, bloop, throw it in the backpack, and then all of a sudden, bloop, 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 bloop. They were just popping up like crazy. Now, if I can figure that out in one try, the Native Americans must have done it that way because it was so easy.
Why else to do it? Yeah, you have to be in 53-degree water for hours to find them.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much more efficient than one by one trying to find each tuber.
Couldn't they even put a pole down to break those dry bones?
That would be inefficient too because the muck is stronger than that. You really have to use the weight of your body to break through all the muck. And a stick to try and drag it through there would just be really tough. And rakes, you can only go so deep with rakes. That's another issue. It'd be tough. People have done it. You could take those big 3-pronged rakes. Some people have tried that, and that works okay. But I'll tell you, doing the grape stomping technique, super efficient. Super efficient. So, yeah, so I figured it out in one try. Native Americans, through eons, they're going to do the most efficient thing. So the plucking thing, my guess is, you had an ethnographer who was watching from a distance, looking out there and trying to figure out what was going on and just sort of made up the story. So, now, it's possible I could be wrong. Possible they could have just plucked them. But, boy, it was so easy to do it the other way. So, again, right now they're just forming. They're just growing. All the leafy material is, doing all the photosynthesis and putting energy and starch into those tubers, and they won't be ripe until the upper growth dies away. And that's why we do this workshop now and not in the winter, because otherwise I would just be looking at an empty lake and I'd be going, well, this is what the leaves look like.
The fur's closed.
Now, and we can't go out there. We could get permission from the Fish and Wildlife people to go out there, but we would never make it back because you would never be able to walk through this muck. You'd just get stuck and they'd have to fly, bring in a night flight thing, haul you up to get you out of there. So you really need to be able to go out in order to.
So how did you get out then?
Well, I didn't do it here.
Oh, you did something.
Yeah, I mean the reason I bring you here is this is one of the most amazing sites in Oregon, period. To see Oregon and Washington, to see this kind of growth. That's why you're here. But no, there actually was another spot on the island where there was a slough, not this many plants, but accessible and deep enough so I could simulate all the research. So, let's see, what else did I want to say about these guys? You can collect them as late as March, but they've already started to produce a new stem. All the tubers are producing new stems for the next year's plants. And so a lot of the starch ends up coming out that way.
And you can't eat the stem.
You can eat other parts of the plant, but I haven't done the experiments on that part yet. I've only done the tubers. Now, typically, a lot of what happens with native cultures is that if they favor a certain part of the plant, they don't eat the other parts. And the reason for that being is you don't want to sabotage the development of the tuber by eating the above ground parts. Even though these are edible to some degree, I just haven't done the research on them.
Could be like potatoes, where once you have an eye growing, you've lost some of that starch and food value in the tuber.
Right. So what else do you want to see in this?
How did they preserve those for longer periods?
Well, how did they serve them?
No,
Preserve.
preserve them. How did they keep them?
With these guys, usually most tubers or root stocks that they would gather would be cooked in a cooking pit, mashed into cakes, dried, and then stored for later rehydration and eating. So they would make big cakes out of this and eat it with everything because, it's a starch. It's like you know, Asian culture's eating rice.
Oh, isn't it a family relative of poi from Hawaii? Isn't that correct?
No,
I've heard that. I don't know.
It's in the Elismataceae, which I don't know what poi is. So, what plant?
I can't recall, but I think I read it. Thayer said that, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look at it.
Yeah. Well, he's usually pretty reliable.
Yeah.
But I would check that out. Anything else on this?
Is it where a potato comes from?
No, it's not even in the same family. They're totally different families, but the flavor is remarkably similar. Okay. And that's why Native Americans gave up on this. As soon as the white man came and brought potatoes with them, so much easier. Potatoes were bigger. They grew on dry land. You could harvest them multiple times during the year. You just had to throw them in the soil and they grew. I mean, it was like a miracle food. And since they tasted similar, that's why they stopped eating this.
But the whole family, community
Lost.
activity is lost.
Yeah.
Versus,
All right. Well, that's the end of the workshop. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank
If
you.
there's no other questions, we can head back. You can gather blackberries on the way. Get in your cars, come back out, whatever you want to do. If anybody wants a book, I have them back at the first parking lot. So if you want to buy one, you can buy them there.
Great.